A wonderful good day to everybody watching my channel. I'm God's Shadow and I'm creating Magic the Gathering content, mostly in Modern, mostly Control, and mostly Grixis Control in that specific order. What you can see behind you or on the screen is my current iteration of Grixis Control, and those who are the die-hard fans of this very beloved color combination are always trying to figure out a way to sneak into the meta and beat the decks that are currently ruling it on tier 1 or 2 status, and we're almost always somewhere around the fringes, tier 4 or 5, if it's at the most. Um, Going over the deck list here, we have 23 lands, 2 of which are Blast Zone. Blast Zone is a very interesting utility land, which has just come into the format with War of the Spark, which has been released 2 weeks ago. And it can be sacrificed for 3 and a tap, and you will destroy all permanents, non-land permanents, with the same converted mana cost as counters on Blast Zone, and you can also I want to say proliferate, but that's in specific mechanic. So you can also add counters, charge counters onto Blast Zone to get up to a specific number. So it's basically engineered explosives on a land, but you can't hit 0 mana permanents like tokens, but that's perfectly fine because we're utilizing that particular design space for our own benefit here with Goblin Realm Master, but I'll get to that in just a second. We're playing 5 shock lands. Sometimes we're a little hard pressed on life because we don't have a main board way to make life in comparison to, for instance, blue-white control or other control combinations with Kaya or timely reinforcements, absorb, whatever, who can just regain a little bit of life there. So we have to be very cautious and always have to adapt our fetching process and the way we shock with our lands specifically to the opponent that we're facing in that matchup, but that is pretty common sense. We're playing 8 fetch lands. For the most part, a control deck wants to have lands in play, but we're topping out at 4 here. Therefore, we can still afford a couple of fetch lands to thin our deck in the mid game and just draw more gas than the usual control deck. On the other hand, though, our spells are generally speaking a little weaker. We don't have the real bombs, so to speak, and therefore we have to dance around our opponent and play them out or outplay them. We do have 2 man lands here in Creeping Tar Pit, which are our other 2 utility lands. Probably the best man land in all of Modern right now because it's unblockable and it's basically the only threat that a control deck has on the battlefield against Planeswalkers once they have resolved and you're being caught. So Creeping Tar Pit and Blast Zone doing a good job there. And the rest here is just to get our very high mana requirements online because we have to be able to have turn 2 Terminate mana and Logic non-mana, and then there's also Rise-Fall with both combinations of blue-black and black-red. So that's very complicated here. Afterwards, we're a little bit flatter or easier with our mana investments. And then on 4 we need to have triple blue. That is a little difficult to achieve with 2 colorless sources, but for the most part we just added them on top. Or the 23rd land is a land that we hadn't been playing before, so that's just an additional mana source that wouldn't have been in there otherwise, so that's fine. In regards to the basics here, we do have a couple of double black sources in the sideboard, and we also from time to time switch to Lilianas in this particular spot with double black mana cost, and therefore we want to have enough basics to play around Blood Moon, but also because Field of Ruin is a strong card in the meta, especially in control mirrors, and you want to be playing at least 6 basics here. Although I don't think you can afford to play more because of the mana restriction I was talking about just a second ago. So our 1-drops here are pretty straightforward. We're utilizing the best 1-drops in black available, which is Discard, and which is also why our deck is pretty good against control and combo, and a little weaker against very aggressive strategies like Burn and Humans, for instance, because you don't want to be playing Thoughtseize, of course, if your opponent's on an aggressive strategy, and you don't want to be top decking these as well if your opponent has no cards in hand and everything on the battlefield. So, but that's a trade-off, because on the other side we have Lightning Bolts to kill most of the small creatures and also go to head in the later stages of the game through a Snapcaster Mage or Jace to just raise. And Serum Visions for a little bit of card selection, because sometimes Terminate's just not a good card, or you don't want to be drawing your discard spells or whatever. So then in the 2-drop slot, the 2-drops are the most important spells in this iteration here, in this deck, because it really combines what we're doing at the top end and here at the 1-drop slot. For the most part, these 4 are not only there to disrupt our opponent, but also to protect our Jace for turn 2 play. There's no better play that we can make on the play than discard into Jace, because Jace gives us the ability to generate card advantage. He also slows our opponents down in case they have to beat us with creatures, and it filters as well. So just an overall really good card, and works well with the flashback ability with discard and Lightning Bolt as well, because that can just go to head. We have Snapcaster Mages. Snapcaster Mages is basically the flip side of Jace. The same, but at instant speed, and it cannot, of course, flip into being a Planeswalker. But on the other hand, on the plus side, it is a nice, what we call Ambush Viper, just a 2/1 that can beat from time to time to pressure Planeswalkers or your opponent's life total, and to support other threats in our deck, so that it can pile up and you can close out the game quickly, more quickly than a usual control deck. And then we have Terminate here. Terminate being our premier removal spell. Really good, especially because the it can't be regenerated clause is pretty relevant in Modern. There are cards like Azuri and Welding Jar that cannot play through a Terminate, which is neat. And what you want to be doing is you want to have at least 6 spot removal spells in your deck, and the same amount of cards here you can also see for our discard magic, because Rise Fall complements our 1-drop discards with having the fall ability. Your opponent discards 2 cards at random, non-land cards though, and Rise also gives us, Rise is great because it makes our discard spells better, and it also generates a little bit of value with our creatures in the graveyard. So Rise 4 just very versatile and very good card. And then there's Logic Knot. Logic Knot is our premier counterspell, at least as long as counterspell itself isn't Modern legal. And as I said in my last video, I expect Miscalculation to be in Modern Horizons instead of counterspell. So Logic Knot will probably stay, but that remains to be seen. Logic Knot here is just an amazing card overall. We have, most of the time, we have enough cards in our graveyard to just have it be a counterspell for 2 blue, and then we try to jump over this 3-drop slot towards our Cryptic Commands to close out the game top end with counterspells. 3 drops, Nimble Obstructionist, a card that, has seen play in Modern from time to time, but hasn't really broken through. I'm a big proponent of Nimble Obstructionist. I'm playing it in basically all my blue decks, but here in Grixis it's just the strongest. You can cycle and counter a triggered or activated ability, which is not a mana ability, and that sometimes involves fetch lands, it involves planeswalker activations, it involves snapcaster triggers. So many cases where Nimble Obstructionist is just good by cycling, and then on the other side it's just a flash creature with a 3/1, so it's as good as a click. And I just really like the versatility here. What you can see overall is that the deck is just so super versatile, and we can go from defense to offense. It's just fluid, right? When there's mid-range here and control here, then we're like right in the middle. We can switch to mid-range, we can switch to control depending on the matchup, and that's what I really liked in this color combination, and that's why I built the deck in this particular way, which basically no one else does and has done in the past. Then here is a slot that I usually switch with cards. Currently I'm playing Goblin Rebel Master because it has been really good, performing really good well in the current meta. Most opponents are playing white because there have been so many white cards that are good being introduced into the meta, and their Goblin Rebel Master is just really good to pressure planeswalkers, to build a board presence, to raise. It's just a value generator. One could say Young Pyromancer is better, but I actually don't think so, because I do not want to be incentivized to play proactively when the game state doesn't require it. And for that very reason, Goblin Rebel Master just generates tokens by itself, and we can keep the board clean. That's just better. Also, the accumulation of damage here with Rebel Master, most of the time 3 turns, like 3 attacks of Goblin Rebel Master is just GG. Then there's Kolaghan's Command, probably the card that really keeps or holds the deck together, generates value, hates on artifacts. Overall, one of the best cards you could possibly imagine. I was lucky when it came out in, what is this, cons something. I picked them up for like 50 cents a piece because at that time already I was playing Grixis, and I thought this is a card that I really, really need in the deck. And then at some point other people picked it up as well, but in the beginning it was really not being appreciated for the amount of value and versatility that it really provides. 4 is a little bit too much though, so 3 is the perfect number for these 3. Really happy with that. For the other slots we're going with different amounts of spells here. And then top end there's just Cryptic Command. Cryptic Command, the single and most important love for any control player. It's so versatile. You generate card advantage most of the time. If you don't generate card advantage, you're generating tempo. You can tap your opponent's creatures to just deal lethal the next turn. And overall, just a good top end card here. So let's jump into the sideboard really quick. This is also just a picture of the current metagame, or a mirror of the current metagame. 4 nil spellbombs here because graveyard strategies are still pretty prevalent. Faithful Suiting is a card that, in my opinion, as many of my followers and watchers, viewers know, is not a card that should be legal in Modern, because it just generates tempo and value to a degree that I don't think is healthy. And Nil Spellbomb tries to put a break on that one, but most of the time it's still too slow or doesn't do enough. But we're still trying to fight it. Then there's Counter Squall and Collective Brutality. Brutality mostly in there for the very aggressive matchups like Burn. It's basically solely in there for Burn, but you can also utilize it because it's so versatile here. You can utilize it against humans. You can utilize it against combo decks. Most of the time, it's not a very strong spell, but it is a spell that you can play, and so that's better than just having dead cards in your main board. Counter Squall against combo and control decks, a card that once we achieve the later stages of the game, combined with Lightning Bolt, Rebel Master, Kolgan's Command, maybe an Ambush Viper, can really turn the tide and make you able to raise your opponent, enable you to raise your opponent. Then there's Fulminator Mage, which I previously was only playing 2 off because I actually was playing Field of Ruin in the main board. But Field of Ruin is a card that doesn't give Grixis as much. We want to be able to deal with blue, black, and red do not have the ability to deal with enchantments very well, and therefore Blast Zone is just the superior card here. Field of Ruin is just dead too many a time, and you only want to have it against control to a certain degree and against Tron. Amulet Titan as well, but also to a lesser degree, and therefore I would rather go with a straightforward main board here and then board in 3 Fulminator Mages, and therefore I added an additional Fulminator Mage. Although I'm fucked up that these are different versions, so I might need to switch it up. Kalitas here does have an effect that is also very uncommon for black on a creature. It does have lifelink, but most importantly, creatures that are going to the graveyard and that our opponent control will be exiled instead. So it's a replacement effect and will receive a 2/2 black zombie. That is good as long as you don't have other static abilities that exile your opponent's graveyard, like Rest in Peace and such. Therefore, if that were to be the case, your opponent has the choice on whether or not they want to use this static ability or replacement effect or the one of Rest in Peace, and you won't get a creature, as Zombie Joker, for instance. In the current meta, it's good against hardened scales because modular is dependent on having your creatures go to the graveyard and not to exile. It is relevant against creature decks in general that are playing hard to deal with permanents like Kitchen Finks and such, where you would always need to spend more than just one removal spell to get rid of it. And you can also raise against humans with the lifelink ability. It's just a really good card, and happy to board it in those matchups. Then there's the Scorpion God, a card that I'm probably being criticized for the most on any subreddit, and people are still smiling at it or about it. Initially, I was actually playing it instead of the Scarab God. I wanted to have the Scarab God, but it was like $20 or something, and I wasn't gonna buy into that hype. And while playing the Scorpion God, I actually figured that in Modern it's the superior card because it just supplements our controlling game plan so well, right? We can beat basically any creature with this Scorpion God. We can beat anything that doesn't have hexproof, of course, but we can beat creatures that have indestructible. We just generate card advantage, and it's not easy to handle. So against any mid-range decks, for the most part, it's really good. But if you're playing against creature decks, including Eldrazi, the Scorpion God is also where you want to be, because you're just gonna generate a lot of value, and you also have a decent clock. And then there's Commandeer. Commandeer is also a card that I just put in here after the most recent video. A card that is not being played in Modern too often, but we're playing, how many are these? 10, 12, 19 blue cards in addition to Commandeer, which we could be exiling in order to receive some sort of permanent from our opponent, and since our opponent's permanents that we can gain control of include planeswalkers, which is not listed here, but it's been errated, we can gain like control of a Karn, of Teferi, of the other Karn, Ugin, whatever, and which would normally be backbreaking, and this way we could just untap with Planeswalker in play, and that is just so powerful that losing 3 cards for it basically is worth it. Not super high on this card, but in the current meta it's probably a good pickup. So this is Grixis Control Modern by me. I hope you enjoy my content. Like and subscribe. I also recently, well, it will be linked here anyway, but I do have a Patreon page, so if you would like to support the channel, I would greatly appreciate it, and have a good time, guys. Cheers.